Yesterday morning, shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning, we received the report of apartment fire at 1945 North Rock Road. It was apartment building number 19. The reports were that there was some heavy smoke coming from one of the apartment buildings. Crews did arrive on scene and they did see active fire and smoke coming from building 19. Second alarm was struck almost immediately due to the fact that it was an apartment complex, that we have a lot of occupants at 8 o'clock in the morning who are typically at home, and the weather conditions were calling for the winds to increase. Fire crews were able to make an entry into the apartment. Most of the fire was confined to the exterior balconies and a void space between the balconies as well as in the attic space. They were able to get the fire under control with relative ease, and they were able to confine it to the east portion of that apartment building. That's a 16-unit apartment building. We had significant fire and water damage in 8 of those units. The other 8 units are not inhabitable because there was water damage or because there was damage to the electrical distribution system. To the entire building, and so Red Cross was called out to help relocate a number of those families. The fire originated on the second level. Apartments 1902 and 1901 were the apartments of focus for our investigators. At this time, we're leaving the fire under investigation. We do not believe the fire was intentionally set. We believe that there's going to be an accidental cause, but there's a couple of things that we need to do some more work on to rule out. One of those possible ignition sources was careless smoking. The other one involves the electrical distribution system for the building. Fortunately for the occupants of that apartment complex, renter's insurance is mandatory, so everybody was insured, and that's great. But with that is going to come a number of fire investigators on the private side from the insurance companies who are going to want to take a look at that scene. We're looking forward to working with them and having some of those electrical components evaluated by an electrical engineer so that we can rule them out as a potential cause of the fire. We estimated the damage at $350,000 to the structure itself and $100,000 to the contents within those apartments, primarily apartment 201. Let me start over. We determined the damage estimate for the contents of the apartments to be $100,000. That's primarily in apartment number 1901 and 1902, but there is some water damage to the other apartments that we're trying to account for.
So the total damage is?
$450,000 total damage, yeah.
Thank you.
Nobody was injured in that fire, but Red Cross was called out to assist with getting folks relocated.
I'm sorry, so you said the fire's still under investigation.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about the smoking.
Yeah.
I understand.
That's okay. The fire is still under investigation. There's 2 potential sources of ignition that we need to rule out. One of them would be smoking, and the other one is the electrical distribution system for the building.
Thank you.
Yes.
Brad, do you think, was it 201, apartment 201?
1901 and 1902.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one was the apartment where you think it actually started?
It looks like to us it was probably 1901, which is the apartment that's on the far east end of the building. Upstairs on the second floor. Okay, shortly after 1 o'clock, we received the report of a grass fire up at the area of 25th and Grove. That's up by Calvary Towers. Our calling party did report a small grass fire. We were able to talk to her and identify where she had first identified the fire. She was very helpful to us in locating that area. But by the time crews arrived, and because of the weather conditions, being the wind and dormant grass and dry vegetation, the grass fire had extended to at least 2 houses to the north of 25th Street. Our crews immediately called for additional assistance. We ended up having nearly 20 fire units up there to get the fire under control. Our incident commander had made a decision that they were going to stop the fire at 26th Street, and so the majority of our crews were sent north of the fire to make a stand at 26th Street. The fire was brought under control relatively quickly, at least within the hour, with the 20 units that were up there. However, 6 houses were damaged. 3 of those 6 houses received damage on the interior of the home. The other 3 homes had damage from radiant heat on the exterior, primarily being that of siding that was damaged. We did have a number of outbuildings and sheds that were damaged, at least 3 of those. We had a couple of fences that were damaged. We had some other things that were outside, like children's toys and things like that that were damaged. The entire block was evacuated by fire crews, and we had a lot of assistance from the Wichita Police Department in that. We estimated the loss for the entire event at $80,000 to the structures. There's probably a loss of around $10,000 to people's contents. The fires that did get inside the homes didn't do a lot of damage inside the home, but it did do some damage, and at least 2 of those homes were occupiable at the time, so Red Cross was called in for assistance, and they tended to 6 adults who needed to be relocated for the evening. There were no civilian or firefighter injuries as a result of that grass fire. However, at the same time that grass fire was occurring, we had 2 other grass fires that were occurring, one near the area of Kincaid and Meade, and another one near the area of OC and Beach. And so there was a time, therefore, about an hour, where we had a number of our units that were dedicated to emergency response on grass fires and structure fires. That put us into a modified response plan. That's something that we prepare for and we practice for. We set up our Department Operations Center at one of our fire stations to help manage the number of units that we have and to place them in areas across town to be able to continue to respond to calls from 911. When we modify our response, we may end up sending 1 unit to an emergency call. For example, if there's a significant medical call, we're going to send a unit. If there's a house fire call, instead of sending a full house fire complement, we'll send 2 engines and a squad for that brief period of time. And if they need more resources once they arrive on the scene, then obviously those requests are processed through 911 and through our Department Operations Center, and we make decisions about what other resources we're going to send and what other resources are available. Shortly after the 25th and Grove grass fire with the structures involved, Kincaid and Meade, and the OC and Beach grass fires, we did have a house fire come in that was at 2:30. It was at 844 North Beebe. That's B-E-B-E. First arriving crews did see smoke showing from the west side of the structure. They called for some additional units, and that request was obviously filled. They discovered the fire in the southeast bedroom. Our crews were able to confine the fire to the southeast bedroom and specifically along the south wall near a window. Our fire investigators were able to identify the source of ignition as a space heater, which had been left on. The space heater was located against a piece of carpet that was being used to occlude the window to make the room dark, and it had ignited the carpet. We estimated the damage at $2,000 to the structure and $1,000 to the contents. The fire is classified as accidental, with a space heater being too close to ordinary combustibles. All of those fires happened within about a 1.5 to 2 hour time frame. We were able to get all of them under control relatively quickly and get our resources redeployed back to their original locations. And so by about 3 o'clock, things were starting to kind of calm back down, and we were able to get our resources back into their appropriate fire stations. And so after about 2 hours, we were able to take the modified response directive away and go back to a normal response. We do remain in a burn ban. This is something that Wichita and Sedgwick County are working on cooperatively together. During this burn ban, which is going to extend at least through Friday, we're going to reevaluate it Friday for this weekend. Nothing can be used outside in the way of open flame without being in violation of that burn ban. That means you can't have recreational fires. That means you cannot use open flame to get rid of weeds. That means you need to keep track of your cigarette butts and your cigar butts. Make sure we're not discarding those out of the windows or putting them in potted plants on your balconies or on your back porch. That's a great way to ruin your day. You're going to potentially have a fire, and that is not something that we want to see happen to anybody. The only thing right now that is exempt from our burn restrictions are the use of barbecue grills. You can continue to use your barbecue grills to prepare meals, but I would caution you, especially if you're using charcoal briquettes or wood fire grill or something along those lines, you need to be very conscientious about what you're doing and how you're handling those things, and make sure that those coals or those pieces of wood are fully extinguished once you're done. Do not leave those things unattended. With the wind blowing like it is today, that can be a recipe for disaster, and we want people to avoid the same fate that some of your neighbors have had over the course of the last couple of weeks.
Okay, so Brad, can you tell us how many you said 25 units were out of the grass fires?
20.
20.
Units on North Grove. The other incidents had a range of 2 to 3. We did receive some assistance from Sedgwick County Fire District 1 as well.
How many firefighters is that?
Oh, that, I don't, I'd have to go back and look. Because each unit has a different number of firefighters. Squads have 2, some of our heavy apparatus have 3 or 4, so I'd have to go back and count.
And Larry and I were just talking about the whole seeing somebody throw out a cigarette butt. Some people may think, oh, that's not going to start a fire. It's so
Right.
small.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, throwing a cigarette butt out, whether you're throwing it out your car window or you're trying to discard it as you're walking into your business appointment in a building, into the flower bed or into a potted plant, whatever that is, that's a bad idea. Now, cigarettes are designed to be fire safe. In fact, they're labeled as fire safe. And so they're designed under normal conditions to self-extinguish if you're not drawing upon them and keeping that red cherry ignited. That all goes out the window when there's wind involved, when there's air currents involved. So you take a day like yesterday or like what we see this morning, where we have a 15, 20 mile an hour wind, and of course the gusts are far below that. The wind, the air current blowing across that cigarette is going to keep it ignited. So if you discard it in a potted plant, or if you discard it in the mulch in the flower bed or onto the grass, the wind's going to blow over the top of that, and it doesn't take a lot of temperature to ignite dormant or dead vegetation. So the potential there is far greater in conditions like this than it would be normally when the grass is green or the plants have a lot of moisture in them and they're not dormant. Throwing a cigarette out a window is not a great idea any time of the year, but it's especially not a good idea to do in weather conditions like what we're going to face probably for the foreseeable future. During the months of January, February, March, and even into April, when we don't have a lot of moisture, we see this happen year after year. The conditions are ripe for grass fires and wildland fires. We don't have a lot of moisture. We haven't had a lot of moisture. The winds are a little more than what we're typically accustomed to in Kansas, and that's just a recipe for something bad to happen. And as much as we prepare and as much as we plan for those kinds of things, we can't control the wind. All we can do is prepare our people for those kinds of things and have an idea what we're going to do given the circumstances. The other thing that's kind of weird right now is the wind. One day it's out of the north, the next day it's out of the south, then the next day it's out of the north. So something as simple as fire travel direction is evolving every day. So like yesterday, the wind was kind of out of the south-southwest. We knew we had to get ahead of that fire to the north to stop it. On a day like today, the wind's out of the north, we know that we're going to have to dedicate our resources to the south to stop it, because what we don't want to have happen is a scenario where we have one block on fire and we're not paying attention to what's going on with the weather, and we get another block on fire. So when our incident commanders and our fire crews arrive, they make a decision about where they're going to make a stand. What's burned is burned. We don't want to have that continue to burn, obviously, but we also don't want to get other properties involved. And so we're going to make tactful decisions about where are we going to deploy our forces and where are we going to stop that fire. And then once we get the head of the fire under control, we can go back and mop up what has already burned. Yeah.
And there's already a grass fire burning this morning
Yeah.
in the county.
Right, in the county.
Surprising at all to you?
No, not surprising, disappointing. I think most people recognize by now that there's been a lot of grass fires, especially over the last couple of weeks. And I would like to think that most people would think before they act, whether it's discarding that cigarette or having that chimenea burning in your backyard. It's just a really bad idea right now. Be a good neighbor, not only good to yourself and to your family, but to your neighbors, and make a better decision right now. We're bound to get some moisture eventually. Let's wait until things green up and we get a little moisture on the ground before we go back to resuming those normal outdoor activities.
Do you have extra people on call in case, like today, because it's so windy again?
Not necessarily extra. I mean, we have the ability to put people into play who are on like a 40-hour schedule, and we have the ability to call people back if we need them. If we were looking at a 40 to 50 mile per hour wind kind of day, we would probably consider putting extra units on track. But we want to make very wise decisions about our resources and how we bring people back and whatnot. So we look at it every day. We evaluate what our needs are going to be. We staff certain apparatus based on needs. So for example, if we were in a severe weather watch day and they were forecasting the potential for tornadoes, we would be staffing up our heavy rescue specialists. If we know that something's going on in the hazardous materials world, we do extra staffing at our hazardous materials station. So on a day like today, obviously the importance of having our squads on track and having people in their fire stations available for call is highly important. But we have the ability to get additional units on track in a relatively short period of time, and we make those decisions based on the forecast, based on the number of people that we have on duty every day, which every day we have a minimum of 117 on duty. Other days we have some more on duty. It just kind of depends on vacation and sick leave and those kinds of things. And we're able to get those additional units deployed in a pretty short order if we need them. And then we also have the ability to manage where we're putting them. So as we have blocks of city where the fire stations are vacated because there's a fire, we move people around. We move units around from the west side to the east side or south side to the north side based on what's happening, the duration of that incident, which we are pretty good at being able to judge that time, how much time is it going to take to get units there, deal with the emergency, and get units back on track. And then it's like a chess game, and we move those pieces of the chess board around to accommodate those other calls, because the 911 calls don't stop. They keep coming in. There's medical calls, there's grass fires, there's car wrecks, there's house fires, and those things don't stop just because you have 20 units at a grass fire with 6 structures involved. Yeah.
Did you ever determine the cause of the 25th and Grove grass fire?
Yeah. We had an eyewitness that saw the fire while it was still relatively small. In fact, she identified it as being about the size of a dinner plate. There was a cigarette that had been discarded near the gateway into Calvary Towers right off of 25th Street. She took us right to that spot. There were a number of cigarettes that had been discarded in that area previously. The interesting thing about a grass fire is, grass fires move pretty quick, so they'll move right over the top of those, and they do relatively minor damage to those cigarette butts that were there. But the one that ignites the fire typically continues to burn because it's got that hot cherry on the end of it. And so we were able to identify specifically the cigarette, even though it was heavily damaged before it got stepped on, and it didn't get stepped on, but sometimes they get stepped on. We were able to find the exact cigarette that caused the fire. Unfortunately, we don't know who discarded the cigarette. That's a pretty busy street. There's a lot of people that go up and down that street all the time. We'd love to talk to them. I don't believe they did anything intentionally, but sometimes we do things without thinking, and the result of that is 6 homes damaged, 3 sheds damaged, people displaced, and it's a real tragedy, and it's completely preventable.